Hello and welcome to the United Bias. I'm Keraans, and today I'm joined by Ruben Corneo. Hey Ruben, how are you?
Hey Kieran, how's it going? I'm not doing too badly. I'm sitting here in Johannesburg, which normally sunny and warm, but at the moment I can inform you is kind of chilly and unpleasant, which makes me kind of jealous because I know that you, right now, as we talk here, are sitting in Valencia having an absolute whale of a time. Let's hear a bit more about that.
Yes, yeah, it's actually it was a bit slightly on the chilly side, believe it or not, and today is the first real good weather day. But all things considered, yeah, pretty good. I actually managed to get to the Mestalla yesterday to watch the relegation scrap between Valencia and Espanyol.
Awesome. So what you're telling me is we actually managed to get an on-site reporter to tell us about what the goings on are at Valencia after what happened with Vinny Jr. As we were talking about last week.
Yes. It felt like one of those correspondents going into a war zone. So I braved the racists and made my way to the Mestalla. Um, and I think key to survival was saying things like, Gary Neville, rubbish, and that might have bought me some favor with the fans.
Are you telling me they haven't built a statue of Gary
Not
Neville's?
as yet. Not as
I
yet.
thought
Yeah,
not as
they
yet.
don't
Okay.
don't speak of Gary Neville in revered tones like they do at Old Trafford. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely not his greatest run. Well, kind of his only run as manager, wasn't it? But definitely not the greatest. And so how was?
Yeah. So the actual experience itself, I was blown away. I've been to some big stadiums around the world. FNB in Joburg, what's that? 90,000. Maracanã, also around 80 to 90,000 for a World Cup final. Brazil, well, no, it was in Brazil. It was Argentina, Germany. I've seen the MCG packed, which is 110,000 give or take for a cricket World Cup final. I've been to Old Trafford for United Liverpool. Amongst many other great sporting arena. But honestly, this was something else. I can't explain it. I think Mestalla is only like 45 to 50,000 people. But I think it's the fan culture, not the racist fan culture, but just the fan culture of following the team and the way they support their team. It was spectacular.
And tell me something. I know that part of their punishment that was handed down by La Liga was partial stadium closure. Was that in effect when you went there? I know it was one of the stands that was supposed to be closed.
Yeah,
Just
so there
given the
were
incident.
like a few sections that were closed, but the majority of the stadium was open. I'd say 90% of the stadium was open. So yeah, it wasn't much of a punishment, to be honest. And it was funny because like I took some pictures and there was a big sign saying basically no to racism, and it was obviously done in Spanish. And then just adjacent to it, there was a giant poster saying "Respect our fans," which I thought was kind of ironic. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
big time.
no to racism, but let's respect our fans because our fans are not racist, obviously. Oh, they would never do such things.
No, we've got such respect for fans that they've earned your respect.
Yeah. So all in all, it was. Look, as a fan experience, I said the singing, the culture, the chanting. It was so loud there, and I guess it could be the last home game of the season. I think it was, and the fact that this is a game to stay up, so that the crowd was really up to support the team. But before the game, an hour and a half before the game, outside the stadium, it was loud. Into the stadium, it was loud, and throughout, it was just absolute chaos when Valencia scored the equalizer in injury time. So it was pandemonium. So yeah, great experience at the stadium, and we didn't experience anything untoward. Yeah, people seemed friendly and nice, but they weren't so nice to Vinny Jr. a week ago. But yeah, in person, I have nothing negative to say.
Yeah, so no, I do think it's interesting that you can kind of get this. I don't know if it speaks to the duality of man or whatever it is, but on the one hand, your experience is that you arrive there. It's this amazing fan experience, and you had a great time, and I mean, it sounds like you're saying you never even felt really much of a hint of it, but as soon as things turn ugly, how quick it is for people to kind of their bad side to come out. It's that kind of mob culture almost of oh well, one guy has started piling on and making monkey chants and all these kind of disgraceful things that people get up to, and then they'll turn around and a week later are perfectly capable of providing a very welcoming experience for you. It's kind of strange that people both seeing the best and the worst of people sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to just man in general. True character of man is seen in difficult
Mm.
times, as you say. It's not when the sun is shining. So it is what it is, and a good event, nonetheless, good experience nonetheless. I will say, ridiculously expensive. I was surprised at how expensive the tickets were. Okay, granted, the seats were nice, but it wasn't in a suite or anything fancy, and it was €90 a ticket, which is absurd. I think it's
Yeah,
absurd, especially as a South African
it's
with
a lot.
what we pay for sporting events. I just thought it was incredible sum of money to pay for a football game. But it's what you do when you're in Europe, I guess. I think it's time to move on, and I think something unfortunate or a stat that I saw going around on the internet yesterday, Sunday, was that Kingsley Coman has won the league title every year from the 2012-13 season to the 22-23 season, which unfortunately, like I said last week when we were talking about Dortmund potentially winning the league, I've seen the story too many times and I've seen Dortmund bottle it. And unfortunately, Dortmund threw it away again. All they needed was to match or better Bayern's record, and they drew 2-2 at home to Mainz. Ruben, what went wrong? What happened to Dortmund on Sunday?
I think, I appreciate the stat you've just quoted, but when I heard it, it was that Kingsley Coman has won every Farmers League every year that he's ever played in. Maybe he should come and test out his theory, trying to get Spurs or someone to to get over the line. But yeah, no, listen, what a way to end the Bundesliga. It's last week we were kind of all excited at the thought of Bayern's 10-year streak being broken. And, look, full disclosure, I should even have been excited about another Munich victory. My wife's family is actually from Bavaria and live about an hour away from Munich. And, so by rights, that should have been quite enjoyable. And another thing, Kieran, do you know what song Dortmund sing before their games kick off?
I do, yes.
It's tough listening. It's You'll Never Walk Alone, listeners. For those of you who weren't necessarily aware, and of course they do revere Jurgen Klopp as the last person to have stopped the great Munich machine. So yeah, look, it's a little bit of a split loyalty. I have plenty of personal reasons to be happy that Munich won, but I just it's just very difficult to see that kind of endless procession. But that's it. Yeah, quite an interesting final day. A lot of drama, obviously going into it with Dortmund being 2 points ahead. The permutations were really that if Dortmund pull off the win, it's theirs. So it was in a sense theirs to throw away. And even if Munich had drawn, that still wasn't enough. So Munich had to get the win to put the pressure on Dortmund, and they just absolutely spectacularly choked. It was against a Mainz team that, if I recall correctly, had lost either 4 or 5 on the spin, and quite heavily. They got hammered in those games. Weren't exactly bringing their best form through to the game against Dortmund. Dortmund is at home, Bayern Munich was away. It was really all set up for them. And next thing they find themselves 2-0 down. And that on the back of, unfortunately, what could have been a really good fairy tale ending in tatters, which is that Haller, obviously came, sort of back, having, won his battle with cancer. And I think maybe it was that emotional aspect that made him give the penalty to him, even though I believe he hadn't been their penalty taker for the rest of the season. That said, he does have a good penalty record generally. I think it's something like 27 out of 28. But yeah, so he takes the penalty, and of course, as we've seen, not the greatest take, saved fairly easy save, and from that moment on, instead of getting the equalizer, a couple minutes later they concede the second goal to Mainz, and from that minute on, it's basically all an uphill battle. Of course, they did claw one back, and then things seemed to finally turn in their favour when Bayern, who'd held the lead from relatively early in the game, then went and conceded a penalty in the 80th minute to Köln, who managed to convert their penalty. And so suddenly it looked like 10 minutes to go. It's Dortmund ahead, and then, of course, the hammer blow. Munich scores in the 89th minute. Mestalla on top of also a very good goal on top of an absolute thunderbolt slightly earlier in the game from Koeman, who seemed to single-handedly be wanting to keep his streak going. And then, even despite a bit of late drama, Dortmund getting the goal in the 95th minute, managing to actually pull them level on points. it just wasn't enough. League lost on goal difference, which is just an extra level of heartbreak, and sort of drama, but ultimately disappointing drama for those who are fans of the sort of game in a more general sense.
I think some perspective is also necessary. I saw an interesting stat doing the rounds by Swiss Ramble Twitter, and he showed the disparity in income between the different leagues, and Bayern Munich, Borussia Dortmund, there's a wage bill difference of 73% between the two clubs, with Bayern Munich's wage bill, published wage bill being 373 million euro to Dortmund's 216. So 58 million more euros spent on a wage bill, and that disparity is bigger. The first place versus second place is far bigger than England, Spain, and Italy, and only is dwarfed by the shenanigans going on in France, where PSG have the highest wage bill in world football. So some perspective is necessary. Dortmund have an exceptionally young team. They don't buy the top of the shelf players, and the stats guys will tell you this. If you look at something like Soccernomics, which really is one of the Bibles, ultimately what matters in football is not the manager, it's not the transfer fees, but it's the wage bill. And typically the team with the highest wage bill in any league is the one that is more likely to succeed. And so when you're dealing with such a disparity, it's very difficult with the resources to compete with Bayern Munich. So, Dortmund players obviously will feel gutted by this, but it's difficult to compete. It's you're taking a knife to a gunfight, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think I probably you said those stats to me, that the only other league that has a relatively comparable disparity is of course the French league, and that I think it's a little bit more competitive. Certainly PSG haven't won 10 leagues in a row, but generally it's an unusual season if PSG don't take the title there, and so it's probably one of the strongest indicators, of course. As to which team is going to be winning the league. I guess what it reminds me of a little bit is the American political system, where there it's pretty much just a case of follow the money. Almost always an election tends to be won by the person who's put the most money into that, or who has the most backing, and so it's kind of comparable in that sense, and it's kind of why you often have a situation where the haves end up with more and the have-nots end up struggling, or as we often see with clubs, sort of slightly preempting our relegation discussion coming up shortly, where a smaller club can just step foot wrong once, and that can kind of derail many years of sort of building towards a larger goal. So I don't really know what the best model is. This is what financial fair play is also supposed to stop, and it just doesn't seem to actually slow that march down.
Yeah, and I guess the answer is we don't know. It's a difficult one to unpack and understand, and free markets incentivize success, and it's difficult. It's a difficult position to overcome the Bayern juggernaut with fan ownership, I guess, as a model. So unless you get someone else throwing money in and putting a club in a position to challenge Bayern Munich from a financial point of view, it's really difficult to see this dominance ending anytime soon. And, akin to almost Manchester City now, you mentioned the Farmers League, but Manchester City have won the league five out of 6 times in England. And that sort of meme comes to mind, are we the Farmers now when we're looking at the English league? Because, the English league is heading in a similar direction unless some of these the traditional juggernauts don't get their act together. Okay, that's enough about Germany. Let's move on to the Premier League. And it was an exciting day at the bottom end of the table. Last week, I believe you and Slide predicted that Everton would stay up, and it was looking dicey for a while there. Leicester City went into a 2-goal lead quite early on against West Ham. So they looked like they were in the pole position. Leeds were down in the second minute. I think Harry Kane scored. So Leeds were on the back foot.
I think it must have been one of the quickest goals of the season. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you had Everton holding on for dear life against Bournemouth, the 0-0, until I believe it was the 60-odd minute where Decore scored a spectacular goal to put them ahead.
Yeah, that is an absolute bullet of a goal from Decore, and he really I think what it's probably fairly easy to point to him as maybe a symptom of what was working, what wasn't working under Lampard and what ended up working under Dyche. I'm not sure exactly what those things are, but Doucouré obviously was somewhat banished from Frank's squad. He was out in the cold, and I mean, obviously he'd under Dyche just had a little bit of a, maybe renaissance is a strong word, but he managed to put through, I think it was 5 goals he's put through since Dyche has taken over. And so it turns out that that maybe all you need is that little bit of just change of personnel or change of who's at the top, and you go from having somebody who's now been accused of being lazy, being out of shape, and actually ends up scoring what is going to be in Everton's history probably one of the most important goals that they've had scored. It's not their first escape on the final day. I think it may have been, the 2 previous occasions, it wasn't even under their control. At least this was, I suppose, under their control. So as soon as that goal went in, they kind of knew that was them back in the driving seat. Leicester, I think they obviously did as much as they could on the day. Leeds just, never really looked in it, and to be honest, I mean, any 3 of those, I think any 3 of those, if they'd gone down, you would have not complained. And certainly Everton, 37% possession or something like that. Again, fairly typical Sean Dyche stat, but doesn't exactly scream, we're going to come storming back up the league. And of course, I think Everton have got, they've got problems on the horizon. We spoke about their, financial fair play charges, and they're kind of locked in a bad situation now. They spent a lot of money, not very well, and they can't really spend their way back out of it because now their hands are largely tied. They can't invest big anymore. The days of largesse are over, and it's difficult to see how they're going to do anything other than sort of scrape around the bottom half of the league until 1 year their number comes up and finally the relegation happens. That's been threatened for a little while. I don't know your take. I don't know what their escape plan is for you.
Well, I think it begins with the Ginger Mourinho that they correctly identified. I mean, Sean Dyche has done a hell of a job turning around their fortunes, and their squad is exceptionally unbalanced. They've got no striker. I mean, Calvert-Lewin's been pretty much injured for the last 2 seasons, and the odd appearance here and there when he's played, he's looked really good, but we've seen it at a higher level with Manchester United struggling with Weghorst up top. So they've had a similar issue, an inability to score goals, as you say, just an imbalanced squad. Dyche proved it at Burnley, where they were spending nothing year on year, real pittance, and made them mainstay in the Premier League. So I think given even Everton's limited resources and the scale of the club and everything behind it, the revenues and everything that Everton attracts, I think Everton is still, if you look at globally, they're still one of the biggest clubs from a revenue perspective in terms of fan support and engagement. So the potential is there with Everton, and they are getting their new stadium. I think if Sean Dyche is able to, just keep them up for a few seasons. Remember, he took over in turmoil. The club was in turmoil. Frank Lampard, disaster class once again. And I think that with a bit of time, with an off-season, Dyche could pick up a few shrewd signings here and there, and he'll be able to, I think he's an excellent manager. I think he's one of those just truly remarkable managers who makes wine from water, so to speak. And I think he's going to...
Yeah, the opposite of a checkbook manager, really.
Yes, he absolutely is. So I'm really curious to see what happens with a historically great club like Everton and Sean Dyche. And if he is able to get a little bit of backing, I think they'll be okay. I think Sean Dyche is just an excellent manager, and hopefully he'll be able to steady the ship there and turn them around. Perhaps even with a fit Calvert-Lewin next season, I think they're destined for better things.
Yeah, certainly if he's firing on all cylinders. I mean, heck, I seem to recall talk a season or 2 back of people thinking he'd be a decent budget backup option at Old Trafford. I don't think he would ever quite have been the right fit, but maybe the solution is already at the club. And then as we said, Leeds, possibly a well-deserved drop down. Do you see them bouncing back up anytime soon?
Well, they've got the financial backing, but the Championship's tough, and they've got the financial backing, and they'll have the payments that trickle down to the championship for the relegated side. So I think they'll do okay. They still
Yeah, the
the
parachute
parachute
payments.
payments. Yes, thanks. I think they've got a good squad. I think all things considered, I think the instability with changing three managers across the season didn't help them. I think that they need to sort it out, and also
Yeah.
the style of play of all three managers were drastically different. So I think they need to do a bit of long-term planning on the lead side, figure out what the direction is going to be, a sustainable pattern of play, get a manager who's going to work towards that, and I think they've got the tools, of course, to come up. Now the question is, how many of those players are going to leave? And that's, it's always with relegation. How many of those players are prepared to stay, to take the step down, to come and fight and help you get up? And I think that's going to be the challenge with Leeds and importantly with Leicester, where I think there's also going to be a lot of turmoil in terms of players going out of the club. Because there are some quality players at both teams and would probably want to be playing in the Premier League or elsewhere in a national first division somewhere in the world. So I think both teams face similar sort of challenges.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I know obviously it's sort of almost a tradition at this point for everyone to start dissecting the teams that are going down and asking who can be raided on the cheap and be brought across. I think I think there's a few names that show up, from the relegated clubs. 2 seasons ago, again, maybe you're talking Tielemans. James Ward-Prowse, he might be the only name from Southampton that people are ready to snap up. They may surprisingly keep a little more of their squad than they'd thought in place. I suppose we'll see how transfer silly season pans out there.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few, and I think we'll go into that in another episode. But just sort of top line, I think people are going to be queuing up for Harvey Barnes. I think they're going to be queuing up for maybe Patson Daka, James Maddison.
I'm
Definitely
sure.
Maddison. So I think there's a few that are really going to be highly sought after. Ricardo Pereira's had his injury issues, but before his injury issues, I thought he looked like quite a dynamic right back and destined for a team higher up the table at some point. So he's another one out of Leicester. And then on the Southampton side, I actually think, definitely. I think the obvious one and all the analytics guys are talking about is about James Ward-Prowse going to Set Piece FC, that being Brentford. So it makes a world of sense for a player like him to go to Brentford. And the most exciting one is probably Romeo Lavia. I think he's a hell of a player, hugely talented and destined for greatness. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him move to someone in the top half of the table. I think he'd be a great addition for Spurs. I think he'd be a great addition for United. I think I could see him really going to almost any team there as an understudy and working his way through. I think he's just, I think he's still a teenager, so I think he's one to look out for sure.
Few names to look out for. And then, speaking of those are the teams going down. The teams coming up, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but the stat was rather interesting. Luton Town in the same season that Leicester got their crazy, obviously 5,000-1 league win. Luton Town was finishing, I think it was something like 11th in League 2, which is 4 steps down the football pyramid, and they've just swapped leagues. So it's amazing how fortunes can twist and turn. But Luton's stadium, I think the entrance to their West Stand is kind of between a chip shop and a barber or something ridiculous. If you've seen the photos doing the rounds on social media, so that'll be quite the story. I suppose they might be in for a shock coming up to the Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. I believe they're going to have to spend quite a bit of money in order to get the stadium up to standard or up to some sort of spec. And yes, it'll be the smallest, lowest capacity ground in the Premier League, I believe, since I think Bournemouth is currently the smallest ground in the Prem. So I believe that they take the mantle at only 10,000 people, which is, it's truly remarkable to see such a tiny stadium. And as you say, not just a tiny stadium, but also really dilapidated. And speaking to some friends from London, Luton isn't exactly the most glamorous place in England. So as well, needing a lot of work at the stadium. But yes, remarkable story to see little Luton Town make their way to the Premier League.
They got a guy, I'm reading his name here, because I mean, of course, not that any of us have ever heard of it. Peli Radak Mpanzu is his name. He literally came up with them from non-league tiers to the Premier League. I mean, that's like your mate from the pub team playing in the Premier League in a few years' time. I mean, it's kind of an incredible story, but yeah, it'll be fun to see how they go next year.
Absolutely. Speaking of other teams that are on the ascendancy, we look at the likes of Brighton with Roberto De Zerbi taking over from Graham Potter and absolutely flying this year, playing expansive, dynamic football, finishing in sixth place. Very much so reminding me of an early Klopp, whether it was his earlier Dortmund days or his earlier Liverpool days. High intensity, pressing, really much front foot, attacking football. Hugely impressive stuff from Brighton, making it into the Europa League.
Yeah, look, I mean that's really an incredible, not a total out of nowhere sort of progression. I mean, if you look at their, the way they've been building a couple of seasons sort of in a row, they've all been, sort of increasing their points finishes, slowly creeping up the table. So, everybody talks about their, their recruitments and, picking up Matoma for a song and look at him now and, out of nowhere, World Cup winners with McAllister in their midfield and, everybody, Kaiser making his move. So, seemingly a midfield that is one of the envies of the Premier League, actually, and we know that that's often one of the most difficult things to assemble. But yeah, I mean, it's been very methodical, feels more sustainable than I think some of these overperforming, if you want to call it that, smaller teams. And yeah, I mean, I think, you have to pick them for, if they don't get, if the vultures don't descend and sort of pick that team apart, which, as I say, other than Kaiser, who I think, probably has fairly good odds of moving. I mean, hopefully if they can keep that team together, they'll make a really good push for Champions League places next year.
I mean, you say that it's not out of nowhere, but I mean, of course they were steady and they made exceptional progress over the years. But remember the criticism with Potter was that they were always underperforming their XG by a huge amount and they just couldn't score goals. They looked great in the eye. They created lots of chances, but all of a sudden they've turned into this force of nature in front of goals with Matoma, McAllister, March contributing, just everyone. Yeah. Evan Ferguson, Danny Welbeck. It didn't matter almost. Dennis Undarb recently.
Yeah, Danny Welbeck.
Yeah, in the year 2023. I mean, this is just incredible, and it's a hallmark of a great system and a great manager. And Pep was recently praising Roberto De Zerbi prior to the game last week against City, and saying something along the lines of he's one of the most influential managers of the last couple of decades in terms of his system and style and what he brings. And Pep always likes to blow a bit of smoke. We've noticed that to opposing players and coaches. He loves that from time to time. And I think he's got a point here. I think Roberto De Zerbi is remarkable. If you look at the Prem, they're the fourth highest scoring team in the league this season. I mean, they've scored more goals than Newcastle United. Newcastle United with the expensively assembled forward line, than Manchester United with all our attacking. All these attacking wide players, for our lack of striker, for whatever you want to say at Manchester United, there's still an expensively assembled squad with lots of attackers who've proven over the years that they're capable of delivering. But still, this Brighton team just seems to outperform them. Brighton even scored more than Tottenham with Harry Kane and Son and Richarlison and Kulusevski. It's remarkable. It's truly remarkable. And part of me wonders if they're going to be able to hold on not just to some of the key players, but Roberto De Zerbi. Because if I tell you what, if I was in Tottenham, if I was in Daniel Levy, I'd be knocking on that door to try and get Roberto De Zerbi to come across to White Hart Lane.
And what's ironic about that is, I think everybody thought when Chelsea came knocking for Potter, I think everybody thought, oh, this might derail their season. And then, as we know, I think they also moved for some of their backroom staff and, all these sort of key scouts that were picking up these gems for zero money. And, obviously, gosh, Chelsea's recruitment looks even worse than ever. But I don't think generally people were thinking, yeah, sure, Potter, he's the guy that's going to Chelsea to the next level, and yet so somehow they actually, if Potter moves on, they get in De Zerbi and look even better. I mean, it's what a success story. I mean, I'm really glad for them, and sort of, hopefully they can maintain that, for a few years. Not possibly indefinitely. Not that it's not another Leicester or whoever it may be.
Yeah, very much so. I think we need to move on, but just final mention to a similar vein to a team in the ascendancy is Aston Villa under Unai Emery. I mean, Emery took over Villa, who were, I think, in the relegation slots at that time. Steven Gerrard,
16th or 17th probably, but very, very close. I mean, a point or two off.
Yeah, and the famous debate of who was worse, Steven Gerrard or Frank Lampard as manager. It's taken a slightly different turn from their playing days where we discussed who their attacking merits. Nonetheless, outstanding performance with Emery being in the Conference League, and I tell you what, given his record in European competition, no one will want to face Villa in the Conference League next season.
Yeah, it could be silverware time. Look, and as a Man United fan, I mean, we all know that if you're playing a European competition and you look in a mirror 3 times and say good evening 3 times, Unai appears behind you and knocks you out of the competition.
That he does. Speaking of Manchester United, the Manchester United women's team, Ruben, I think this needs special mention. The women's team finished second in the WSL, 2 points behind the mighty Chelsea team, widely regarded as one of the, definitely the best team in England and one of the dominant forces across Europe. Finished 2 points behind Chelsea in the league and lost in the cup final as well. A truly remarkable season when you consider that the Manchester United women's team, again, because the Glazers are incompetent, was only founded in 2018, a mere 5 years ago, and had to work our way up the league system, get into the WSL, and not a couple of years ago, the previous manager, Casey Stoney, resigned, saying that there was a lack of direction, there was a lack of commitment from, again, same board and directors who our club is unhappy with. So I think that remarkable performance from the women's team.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's for a team that didn't exist 5 years ago, it's really impressive. Well, they did exist more than 5 years ago. I mean, one of the many sticks that we can beat the Glazers with, of course, is they disbanded the women's team. I forget, sort of early 2000s, maybe 2005, something like that. And I think it just is sort of a testament to also just the sort of growth, I think, more generally of the women's game, that we've hit a point where, I think just commercially and in terms of, the popularity of the game, they just couldn't continue to ignore it. And I think have actually, invested quite successfully in the squad. I mean, just, absolutely gutted that it came down to, effectively 2 1-0 losses to Chelsea away from winning the double, because, I mean, I think looking back at the stats, the women's team, Keraans, remind me, I mean, they won 7 or 8 or something like that of their last games, and in their last, and I think it was Chelsea. It was that 1-0 loss to Chelsea, which was their previous loss. So, I mean, that's literally, unfortunately, 2 season-defining losses, but still, nevertheless, a fantastic achievement.
Yes, in fact, if you go back, I believe in the league, out of the last 10 games in the league, the women's team won 9, with only a single loss being to Chelsea. And again, the final, also a 1-0 loss to Chelsea. So really narrow, and I hope this inspires whoever our new owners are going to be to invest in this team and this project and really see it through, because there's no reason why Manchester United women shouldn't be competing and inspiring young boys and girls. In fact, like the men's team have inspired us for so many years, and to really see the women's team suddenly all of a sudden appear on major broadcasters across the world, I think it's fantastic, and I really hope that this is going to be a turning point, and we see this team go from strength to strength.
Yeah, absolutely. No, looking forward to their performances next season.
Speaking of another team that finished strongly, the Manchester United men's team. Well, Slide predicted a loss to Slide, who isn't here, by the way, because of illness, unfortunately. predicted a loss to, or feared that we wouldn't get the results, perhaps, against Chelsea and Fulham. Glad to say two reasonably decent victories, comfortable against Chelsea, and then a come-behind victory at home against Fulham to see off a strong end to the season.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. I was threatening Slide all week that I couldn't wait for the "I told you so" segment, and I have to question: is he really sick, or is he just hiding from having to report back on our games last weekend? But that was it was very satisfying into the season. I mean, look, that Chelsea game, it was. Look, I mean, it wasn't the floodgates opening, but nevertheless, it was our first four-goal win of the season. So that was great, and an absolutely incredible stat. It was our highest XG that we've achieved literally since they started tracking XG stats, which is sort of well over a decade, I think, by now. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird game. It felt a little bit like sort of two drunkards at a bar slugging away at each other at times in that game, certainly in the early part of the game. But then I think when we sort of eventually, when Chelsea had done with missing, the several chances that they had flashing across goal, we obviously then managed to start piling on and had a really good looking victory. I think it was, last week we asked where are the goals going to come from. It turns out everywhere. Casemiro just with yet another important goal in another important game. Martial chipping in, Rashford chipping in. It's sort of like a really, like a really nice to see a sort of maybe not complete performance, but certainly a performance where we sort of seem to get a little bit, actually get the heart racing a little bit and the blood pumping to actually see us, be able to sort of attack and produce some sort of eye-catching football. Yeah, and which, it's kind of strange that for all that, we'll certainly play better and score fewer goals, which is actually I think what happened at the next game at Fulham. Did you manage to catch the game, Kieran?
So I caught the Chelsea game. I couldn't catch the Fulham game as we were on the way to the stadium to see the Valencia Espanyol game. But I believe somewhat of a near miracle occurred. I believe there was a David De Gea penalty save.
Yeah, one for the collector's books, that's for sure, and actually a pretty good save. I did, funny enough, see that he saved three penalties in the last two seasons, which is I think the second most by any keeper. So I don't know if he has perhaps changed his technique. I think I read something like that, or if he's changed his approach, or exactly what it might be. But good to see that he did actually stop one of those. Nothing that has yet quelled the debate about does Dave need to be our number one next season. But that it was again that thing you talk about, that moment player, and he really dug up, found one of those moments. Okay, look, not an absolutely clutch game. It didn't change our season all that much, but still, absolutely swung. Sort of a team that looked like it was going to sleep a little bit, with that initial run against play goal somewhat from Fulham, and then a second goal I think would have been the nail in the coffin. And so to dig out that save, you could see. Honestly, from that moment on, we were on the front foot. Our passing suddenly looked slick. We were doing a lot of one-touch passes that sort of hadn't really been attempting. We'd been very stodgy in possession in games gone by, even with that not bizarre, with that sort of haul we got at Chelsea. Certainly our sort of quick touch interchange and interplay along the top of the sort of penalty area was a lot more impressive than it has been in other seasons. Well, in other games this season. So yeah, it's sort of a good result overall. Nice to see some of the names are getting on the score sheet. Absolutely filthy assist from Fred for Bruno's goal. The duality of Fred, was on full display for everyone to see. But yeah. A beautiful pass for another goal for Bruno to slot behind. So yeah, it sort of ends up being a pretty good season, all told. Obviously we'll sort of debate probably after the FA Cup our feelings on whether it was a truly successful season or not. But yeah, a good way to round out the league season in particular. And despite all the debates a few weeks back about is Liverpool going to catch us? Can we get 3 wins out of 4? Well, we've made it 4 out of 4, and yeah, second highest points total since Alex left. I think certainly based on these last 2 games, not all that much to complain about.
Yeah, somewhat satisfying, and I think if you were to be honest, the beginning of the season, I think I believe you shared one of those, the pundits in the UK sharing their top 4 picks. And I think we, in some of our circles that we have, not many people picked Manchester United to be in the top 4. If we're being upfront about it, at the beginning of the season, Manchester City looked strong as always. Everyone was touting Spurs after their excellent transfer window and the momentum they had from the previous season with Antonio Conte. You had Liverpool as mainstays after spending, further investing in their squad, more big money signings up front. So really, it felt like those three were going to be, in a battle for the Premier League, if anything. And then came the rest, trying to figure it out. They still had Chelsea with their huge pockets and Thomas Tuchel at the helm. So I think really most people thought that the top 4 would compromise of those 4 teams. And, the disaster ending to the season under Ralph Rangnick, and then the beginning of our season, Brentford and the like, no one really saw Manchester United finishing in the top 4. Sort of, turn it around and finish with, as you say, 75 points. I think is a decent performance. It's a step. It's in the right direction. I think more than anything, there's a bit of stability and a platform to build from. And, cup down, another potentially to go. The FA Cup's obviously going to be very difficult against this Manchester City side, who have the luxury of essentially resting their 11 this past weekend. How do you see our chances against City? I mean, bearing in mind, we have beaten them this season, so it's not impossible. How do you see the FA Cup final going? And what are the prospects? I hear some murmurings about potentially Lisandro Martinez being available and potentially Anthony somehow miraculously being available. So what are your thoughts on this, Ruben?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously the Anthony injury, at the time, and he's got his detractors and certainly, amongst the people that we sort of tend to chat about football with, he's I think divisive would even be a kind way of putting it. A figure, I think a lot of them are already chalking him up as being an utter failure. My take has always been I think he executes the tactical instructions that Erik ten Hag wants almost to perfection. He hasn't been flashy yet, but I think that'll come. I think as his maturity improves, I think even towards this tail end of the season, he's been more willing to take on his man, got an assist off his right foot a couple games back, which I think most of us weren't even aware that his right foot existed, so I generally think that he's probably going to come good as an important player for us. And the previous time he was injured this season, you could see our balance was off. We suddenly again reverted to being left wing FC. Suddenly we had nothing really coming through that right hand side. We weren't able to recycle possession as effectively, which is one thing that he's very effective at is that sort of ball retention. Kind of almost incrementally moving things up the pitch. All those kinds of things he's good at, the unglamorous things or the things that you don't necessarily, you can't point to a sort of flashy stat to back up what he's good at, but certainly he does those things. Initially, when he went off injured, I thought this is, even looking towards the FA Cup final, possibly a bit of an issue. Luckily, I mean, Jadon Sancho's looked really good these last 2 games playing on the right. It was initially sort of enforced in the latter part of the Chelsea game that he had to come on and well, not come on rather, but at least he had to switch over onto the other wing, and it looked like he certainly put in a good performance there. I think probably got robbed of a couple of assists, to be honest, but chipping in with a really sort of vital goal as well in these last couple of games, goal and an assist. I think he's looked good, he's looked positive, he's looked more confident. So I think that's hopefully, if he can, if Anthony can't make it, he's sort of getting into form. I think the more important one is Martinez, as I've spoken about before. I think his distribution is absolutely key to how we play. It takes some of the pressure off De Gea, and it kind of lets us have somebody, because even where we don't have guys who, Casemiro, sure, he's great at breaking up play and winning back the ball. He's not, I don't think, particularly good this season at any rate, been particularly good at hanging onto the ball. Eriksen, he might spray some really nice passes. Again, not somebody who sort of has necessarily been good at that initial build-up play, and so I think we've missed Martinez with that, and I think if he can play, it'll be a pretty important part of the lineup. I also suspect that he, when we won, and Keraans, I mean, you can correct me, the Old Trafford game, Fred, I think, did start, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I believe Fred was. There was a game where Fred was running around and looked like a pressing machine and bothered and harried and harassed the Man City midfield.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that is that was exactly it. That Fred played that's a very important role, harrying. I mean, as we know, he can do. That's kind of a key part of his role. And when I saw him start now this game against Fulham, I mean, yes, maybe it was an issue of sort of resting Eriksen, but I also think it may have been with an eye to potentially get him on the pitch against City. So it's tough. I mean, I think obviously it's probably City's to lose. I mean, I think they, haven't been. I mean, look, I mean, they weren't in, I suppose, particularly good form these last couple of games at the end of the season. But I mean, once you've won the league, is there all that much to read into your form? Of course, there is the danger of sort of taking your foot off the pedal and not being. If I had to look at our guys, I mean, I think these two games have really put them on the front foot. So, am I more confident than I was maybe a week ago when we were chatting? I do think so. Do I think that City are still favoured? Yeah, probably. Just looking on balance at the whole season. But that said, I mean, we certainly have put in. We certainly game at Old Trafford. I thought we did look pretty good against them. So it's probably something that we could pull off.
Yeah, and perhaps a bit of an omen of sorts. That game in January, we were without Lisandro Martinez because he was still recovering from his World Cup winning exertions and the parties that were going on in Buenos Aires.
His hangovers.
He was actually just on the bench in that game, and Anthony did not start either. We had Bruno playing on the right instead, doing a lot of the creative work and driving balls into the box, and he's harrying and pressing. And so you had Fred, Casemiro, and Eriksen along the middle. So, very interesting that could potentially, if Anthony and Lisandro are unavailable, it could be a very similar lineup to the one that defeated Manchester City in January.
Yeah, that would be an interesting prospect. Yeah, and of course it's not the Etihad. It's a neutral venue. It's a big game, and these one-off cup games, you never know. Anyone can beat anyone on the day, except Inter. We probably won't beat City at the Champions League final.
Yeah, I guess it's very much up to us to stop the treble. I think that's it for today. I think we'll be back in a week's time, looking back at the FA Cup final, hopefully with a positive performance and or result to report on. That's all from us this week at the United Bias. Thank you for stopping by.